going to Cape Kennedy.
Oh, okay, nice.
We go to the Titusville out there. There's a place and we get a cabin there and just we stay there and we're not cold for like a week.
Yeah, jealous, very jealous. This weekend's actually the weekend we always went to. My in-laws used to live down in Naples.
Oh.
And it's the long weekend because the kids have off school on Friday for in-service, and then Monday's, Martin Luther King Day. That's next weekend. But no, is it this weekend? It's this weekend, right? So so we had a 4-day weekend right there. So we'd always grab one extra day on the end and go down there. Flights are always cheap this time of year, and we get in and out for a lot of times under $400 for 4 flights.
Yeah, that's why we go next. That's why we go. The week that we go is Martin Luther King Day because my wife is a teacher and she gets that day off school, so it's one less day that she has to take off.
Yeah. So.
I think Lieutenant Davis usually lets Mayor come in the garage. So
Then usually here. So.
Yeah, I'm gonna see if.
See where he's at.
Yeah. See where.
All right. We're just going through Wednesday.
Yeah,
We're still feeling. I mean,
you know me. You know how I got.
The cash out option's dwindling right now, but.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, just to make sure he's not just sitting there waiting.
Yeah.
We did that one time because the top ramen dude was lingering out front.
But
Where's that guy been? I haven't seen him in forever.
he got some charges.
Oh, does he?
And, but he hasn't.
Oh,
He might have one day. Not that one, right?
yeah, and what's his face? I just blanking out the name of the Twilight song.
What's
Got
that?
like 24 ounce or something.
Oh, you're talking about Sir Major?
Sir Major.
Yeah.
You got like 36, right?
That's good.
Well, I rented this. I normally rent a ticket folder, and then I wanted to do some stuff for conversion. And it's about $150 a week to rent. Sure. So I'm already $400 in if I rent it. For 3 or 4 projects this year.
But I don't know where their house is, so you got to buy it.
And with a deal like that, and then like
I'm okay with that.
It was on a day where I had my job.
and we were driving by, and there was deer feet in this field, and I just, we're on a county road, nobody was around, I saw it, it's right in
Funeral
parks.
homes back home.
Picked up a camera and started shooting.
From Toledo here to Woodville. Yeah, she's straight shot down 280.
So, yeah,
So. There he is.
Oh. I am way under.
you win.
This is like the professor in class, you have like 9 minutes. How's it going?
Yeah.
All right.
Give me a minute to get my live unit online.
You going live?
Yeah, we usually stream this.
Yeah.
Thank you. I assume.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just do it out of the park again.
15 to 35.
Oh, Becca was like, yeah, that was all Steven's gear, so I'm really happy for her. He got a really good lens.
So, yeah.
One, that was
Yeah, absolutely.
Looks back on that, so I said, we're still here. She almost did. Well, what made her almost was the trip to England.
Oh, that would have thrown me for a
Because
loop.
they would call her and ask her if she wanted to go. Ready?
Oh, you are ready, okay, I'm sorry.
Ready? Everyone ready? Yep.
I'll toss that back to you. All right. Well, I apologize for being 4 minutes and 45 seconds late. So I think that was the subject of the over-under earlier today. But thank you for coming to our end-of-year crime stats news conference. You might remember, I think it was 2 years ago, so this would have been January of '23. We made the decision every 90 days, so every quarter, to meet with the media and talk about the progress that we had seen over the previous quarter. So I think at that time we were doing end of year 2022, but then we did first quarter 23, second quarter 23, third quarter, we've been doing this every 3 months. So this is in some ways just the natural time for any update that we would be doing regardless of what the numbers say. But I think this one is a little more significant for 2 reasons. One, it is the end of the year, and there's something about a yearly comparison that I think resonates with people maybe a little more than every 3-month subset. But the second big reason is that our numbers continue to improve. Toledo continues to be a safer place to live and start a business than it was a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. In fact, the numbers really are encouraging. Last year, we saw crime go down for the 3rd straight year. And in particular, and as you can see, it went down in every category. But the one that is most important to me, because it involves human life, is our homicide rate. Our homicide rate has now gone down for 3 consecutive years. It went down in 22 from where it was in 21. It then went down in 23 from where it was in 22. And as you can see again in 24, it went down from where it was in 23. 3 consecutive years of consistently improving numbers, to the point where our homicides last year in Toledo were about half of what they were just 3 years ago. We talked a year ago at this time how encouraged we were that our homicide rate had decreased 30% from where it had been in 2002, and it had. And while that was true nationally, the national average was about a 10% reduction. And at 30%, we emphasized that meant that Toledo was improving at 3 times the national rate. And all that was as true 1 year ago as it is today. I might say that just math being what it is, when you see a 30% reduction in anything, or technically a 30% improvement, from a percentage basis, it's hard then to enjoy another large percentage decrease the next year. In other words, you're starting from a lower percentage. And so even after a 30% reduction a year ago at this time, we're here today talking about another 18% reduction. That is really significant. And I think what you are seeing now is homicide numbers that are in line with what we saw before the pandemic. Now again, I say this every time, but it's important to say because we're dealing with, again, human lives. We don't want any homicides. We won't be happy until there are 0 in our city. And even while intellectually I think we all realize that's probably not attainable, it's still our goal. And so while we are encouraged that we've cut homicides now almost in half in just 3 years, we want that number to continue going down. And so when I talk about this in numeric terms, I know it can seem cold in some ways, and I don't mean it to be that way, but I just think it's important to compare apples to apples. You hear a lot of people, perhaps driven by ideology, but perhaps driven by, the access to technology and information that we have, talking about how Toledo is so much less safe than it was, and oh my goodness, I'm not going to go to the mall, and I can't do. The reality is so we see our homicides last year in 37. We're at 37. Exactly 30 years ago, right? Nice round number. 1994, there were 44. The next year in 1995, there were 38. The year before that, there were 49. You start to look at some of the numbers over the last 30 years. In 2002, there were 31. In 04, there were 33. The next year, 30, 35, 33, 39, 37. The years immediately preceding the pandemic, 37, 36, 37, 35. Last year, 37. I guess what I'm trying to say is this, I don't know, we experienced something during the pandemic that was unacceptable, and it was terrible. It was terrible for the community, it was terrible for families, and it was happening all over the country. But I think with these numbers now, for 3 straight years of declining numbers, and now seeing where we are and where we stack up over that 30-year average, we now can say that the pandemic is over, and what happened during the pandemic is over. And I don't know if one of the differences is that today, when something bad happens in our community, people get a text alert to their phone. Their wristwatch starts buzzing. Their pocket starts buzzing. We know about things. They are more present in our lives in a way that maybe they weren't 30 or 40 years ago. That's a good thing. The sharing of information is positive and healthy in a democracy. But I think it sometimes might skew our perceptions of the present and the past. I think it would surprise Toledoans to know that there are significantly fewer homicides per year in our city than there were 30 years ago. Significantly, 15, 20% less per year, every year. It doesn't feel that way because 30 years ago we weren't getting text alerts from our favorite local news station when something bad happened. And I'm glad that those text alerts happen. I'm not, we're not going to put toothpaste back in the tube. It's an important component of keeping the public informed. But it does have the ability to create maybe a false sense of the past. Because in reality, the reality is our numbers today are better on violent crime than they were 30 years ago by a long shot, by a wide margin. And I don't know if that's the perception that Toledoans feel. So that's why it is important to have these events, because we are mathematically, tangibly, a safer community than we've been in 30 years. And I think that would be hard for some people to believe, but it's true. I think it would be hard for some people to believe just because of the perception that the immediacy of social media provides. But these events, these news conferences are about facts. And the facts of the matter are we have seen crime go down every year for 3 consecutive years. Our numbers now, we can say with accuracy that Toledo is a safer place today than it was 30 years ago, and a safer place than it was 20 years ago. And our numbers are almost identical to where it was 10 years ago. Occasionally you will hear people argue, make the opposite point. And I just would have to say that anyone now, after years of improving crime stats, and after the release of this data, which compares us favorably to any era in Toledo over the last 30 years, I think the only people who would say that would be people who maybe don't know the facts, which is why we have these events, these news conferences, or people who do know the facts but are trying to score political points. And I hope that those in the latter category, will have a chance to reflect, maybe do some self-reflection about, about their role in telling Toledo's story. Because Toledo's story, while not perfect, and we aren't perfect and we're not satisfied, it is also the case that we are a safer community, numerically, statistically, and in every measure than we've been any time in the last 30 years. And if that seems incongruous to people, it could be the power of social media, it could be just not knowing the facts, or it could be a deliberate and political attempt to score points. And to score political points at the expense of a human life is really, it's ghoulish. And that is why our focus, every 90 days, whether the numbers are good or bad, is just to talk about the facts. And the facts in Toledo is that we are moving in the right direction. So we could get into more of the numbers, and you might want to or you might not want to, but I think I'd like to turn it over to Chief Trenley, who I think it is important to emphasize that while there was a lot going on and a lot of different factors involved, we started to see this improvement in our crime numbers right at about the time he became chief. And people ask me all the time, geez, why, these numbers are so much better and crime is down and homicides are half of what they were 3 years ago, 3 straight years of improvement, what's happened? And I think there's a lot of things. Growing the size of the police force has helped us. Some of our investment in youth programming has helped us. Our efforts to fight blight has helped. Our efforts with MONSE, the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, and the grants we've gotten to put violence interrupters in schools, that's helped too. But a better, we've seen our county prosecutor, Julia Bates, really prosecute and put away some of these folks who are committing these crimes in a really aggressive way. I've talked about Rebecca Facey and her emphasis on domestic violence as the city prosecutor. All of these things had a factor, but our chief has been a big part of this success story as well, because his time as chief has coincided with the decline that we've seen. So I want to invite him to the microphone to share his thoughts as well.
Thank you, sir. And just to kind of build off of something you were talking about there, it's actually better than even the numbers you're talking about when you start comparing us to the 90s. Somewhere 7, 8 years ago, we made a switch, and I don't know why it happened, but I kind of got stuck with it. Of these homicide numbers, these are all the homicides that occurred in the city of Toledo, and that's classified as a homicide. So technically, there are 6 homicides in that in the 90s and even 2000s we would not have counted because they're not criminal homicides. So the previous numbers were FBI numbers that we used from UCR data, and they were criminal homicides. So technically there's 4 justified homicides and then 2 law enforcement involved homicides in here that is counted against us. When I go to trainings with other chiefs and everything else, no other department actually counts them this way. They always take those numbers out. Nobody counts their own officer involved into these numbers. So in reality, it's even better than it looks on here, but don't want to kind of look like we're trying to change things midstream, so we keep it the way it is, right? So, but the fact of the matter is, it's better than it even looks. So I appreciate the mayor saying that, having my involvement. There's a lot of things that we've done since I've taken over to try to improve the way we're addressing crime in the city, to improve officer morale, to get officers out more on the street, to get officers in the neighborhoods, to try to get more community buy-in. And I will tell you, solving crime without community buy-in, without community help is almost impossible. Our community knows their neighborhoods, and really they know what happens out there, and during these incidents they know what happened. But getting them to be willing to talk to us has always been a major hurdle for law enforcement. So the reality is us continuing to build that relationship, continuing to show that confidence that they can talk to us and provide us information, and we will safeguard that information and safeguard their identity is very important. Technology has allowed people to share things faster, get news faster. It's also allowed us to receive more anonymous tips. So we've leveraged that technology, allowing our citizens, residents, to go ahead and register, their cameras and provide them with, anonymous texting and phone calls that they can call in and give us information. And that has helped. So there's a lot of things, and the mayor's right. It's more than just the police department. It's everything inside the city, everything that we're doing to try to reduce blight, to try to reduce the opportunity for crimes. Those are all things that happen in conjunction with our sister departments in the city, Monzi, working with them in a, in a professional manner, in that we're trying to work towards the same goals. Those things all contribute to the reduction in the crime that you're seeing here. So, but really, we couldn't be here without our detectives and without our officers on the street. One of the things when we took over was making sure our officers understood the importance of being out there for their community, making sure they understood, even coming off the years that led up to that and the negative thoughts that were out there about law enforcement, making sure that they understood our community is a little bit different. Our community has always embraced law enforcement and the police department, and continues to do so even to this day. So making sure they understand that, and that there is a need for them to be there, and kind of rejuvenating them to kind of look at their job and get out there in the street and do the things that they do on a daily basis that impact crime. Our foot patrols that we're doing, our team initiatives, our monthly target areas, those are all things that I think help reduce crime. Keeping your eye on the ball, if you will. Making sure that you're paying attention to your areas, making sure you know the trends that are occurring in your area, and doing things to get in front of that, and to make sure unfortunately, there's gonna always be crime in any city, as much as we'd like it to be not, but once you start to see patterns, once you start to see things happening, being able to interrupt those and intervene before they get out of control helps reduce numbers. I think when we were talking back at the end of the third quarter, our burglary numbers were up just a little bit. It hadn't been up since 2011, I believe it is. Went back, talked to the officers, talked to the command staff, talked at our crime stat meetings, and put an emphasis on making sure we're looking at those burglaries, because it's easy to become complacent because we're focused on the violent crime, right? Because that's the one that everybody seems to care about. I care about burglaries. So reiterating that to them and making sure that they continue to look for those patterns and those series, and getting those out there, and making sure our officers are paying attention and trying to interrupt those. Our detectives are investigating those. And we were able to gain control of that in that last quarter and reduce it again. It's just amazing to me that that number is where it's at. I think I talked about that before. It was upwards in 9,000 back in 2011. So that is a humongous decrease. As the mayor was saying, since 22, we're down 43% in homicides. So something that we are doing is working. Yes, I concur. Other cities are seeing reductions. Other cities are reducing homicides. That is a national trend. We seem to be doing it a little bit better than most. So there is something there that says we're doing something right. Clearance rates. Our homicides last year, 86% clearance rates. 55 to 60% is the national average. So that is a humongous feat there for our detectives to be able to clear all those homicides. And getting shooters and homicide suspects off the street makes our city safer. It prevents future homicides. So those are all key things that go into reducing our crime. And I couldn't be happier with our team, and our officers are doing a fantastic job. So thank you.
Okay. I guess I might just say one last thing. Sometimes when we have these news conferences and we emphasize the homicides are going down, as they have for several years in a row now, sometimes cynics will say, oh yeah, but that's, there's still, there's still just as many people getting shot as ever before, or there's still more shootings, and people, just the doctors are saving people at the hospital at a better rate. That is also not true. Total shootings, we measure the number of shootings back with ShotSpotter. Total shootings are going down. The people being shot is going down. I think it was a 7% reduction from 20, there you go, from 22 to 23. I think there were 217 individuals shot in 22, no, I'm sorry, in 23, and about 200 shot in 24. So everything is going down. Shooting incidents, people being shot, people being killed from being shot. So again, it's a difficult topic to talk about because it seems a little too analytical when we're talking about statistics when in reality, what's at stake are human lives. But it's just so important that we tell our story correctly because it's hard enough to solve the problems of the world, even when we can agree on the facts. When you have folks, either because of a lack of information or more troublingly, because of an ideological desire to score cheap political points, when you have people who are just utterly convinced in a different set of facts, it makes solving the problems of the world even more difficult. So, John Adams said a long time ago, you're entitled to your own opinions, you're not entitled to your own facts. And the facts of the matter are, on every category we measure, Toledo was safer last year than the year before. And when you start going back 10, 20, 30 years ago, the numbers just don't lie. Toledo is a safer community today than it has been any time in the last 30 years. Those are the facts. You can apply your opinions and your ideology on top of those facts, but we have to at least agree that what the facts are. So I want to thank everyone for being here. You know, the chief mentioned something important. He talked about last quarter when burglaries were a little higher. You can see that we came in, you call it a 0% decrease. I think there were, 7 fewer burglaries in 24 than there were in 23, so we'll round that to a 0% reduction, but it still went down. But the point is, when we gathered in the fourth quarter to talk about it, burglaries are actually up. We still had our news conference. It's not like we just do these news conferences when the data is encouraging. We do it whether the numbers are going up or down, and we'll be back here in 90 days doing the same thing. It's part of transparency and part of telling a story of a city that, while not perfect, and while not where we want to be, is absolutely making progress in the right direction. So, okay. Thank you, thank you.
Any questions?
Oh, are there questions? Yeah. I'm sorry.
I have a few questions for Chief Treasurer.
Okay.
I know that for the past 3 consecutive years, you guys have seen crime statistics go down, but is there anything in 2024 that you guys just newly implemented that you want to continue in 2025?
Yeah, so in 24, two things. We continued our team initiative and our foot patrols that we started in 23 for the foot patrols. But one of the things we changed inside 24 was, so every month we have a comp stat, what we call a crime stat meeting with all our commanders come in and we discuss the crime that's occurring in the city. And while I wanted to increase the number of foot patrol areas, I just didn't have the manpower to do it at that time. So what we decided to do is do a monthly target area. And that is going to continue into 25 as well, because we start seeing success in reducing crime in those areas. Not every time, well, actually every single one had it, but what we do is we'll also compare it to the trend of the city. So look at the city as a whole. So the city's going down, let's say 10%. Sometimes in our target area it was going down 30%. Sometimes it was just at 10%. So maybe we start looking at what activities we did inside that target area to see what's working, what's not working. And I'm a huge believer in doing things that work and studying it and try to figure out what actually those initiatives that actually reduce crime, those are the ones I want to continue to do and expand across the rest of the city. The traditional policing model is that shotgun approach, you just throw a bunch of officers in there and hope you reduce crime. No, I'm looking to do more targeted enforcement in the area. And when we do targeted enforcement, it's not always just traffic stops and arrests. Our community service officers work in there. I think I talked about this once before, but one initiative they did is they got some dogs that were getting ready to be adopted and they took the dogs for walks. And the dogs were in the neighborhood with the officers walking. And people would come up to the officers and talk to them. More people than would ever come up and talk to the officer. So using that dog as a conduit for, communication with the community was amazing. I would have never thought of it. My community services lieutenant thought of it. I chastised her a little bit because I'm like, as the chief, I started thinking about liability. What happens if this? What this? I start thinking all the negative things, right? But then eventually I go, okay, that's pretty smart. Out of box thinking. That's what I want our commanders to do. I want you to think, on your own. Don't just do the traditional thing. Find ways to improve, community interaction, find ways to reduce crime. So those target areas are going to continue. We're going to continue with the foot patrol areas, and we'll continue with the team initiatives. We're still looking for new opportunities, and as our class graduates this Friday, we get more manpower out there. It allows us to do more things on the street.
Thank you.
You mentioned the homicide stats. You've had 3 homicides in the last 10 days. Are we looking at a spike? Is there a reason for it?
Yep.
What's going on?
So we're one above where we were at this time last year. So last year at this time we had 2. It was close together, so it is concerning. Unfortunately, in 2 of those instances, there was some illegal activity happening, which we wish, people wouldn't come into the city or be a part of illegal activity in the city. But it's still concerning. It's still things that we're looking at. We're, putting extra patrols out there with our gang task force and our special operations bureau, and make sure we just have some extra people on the street to try to control that.
And I might just say, because obviously I'm aware of that, and I talk to the chief about it all the time. Sometimes when that point is raised, and it's an understandable point, I compare it to the difference between climate and weather. In other words, today, right now, it's a really cold day in Toledo. You go outside, it's cold. That does not change the fact that, generally speaking, the climate of the earth is getting warmer. So in other words, you can have the temperature of planet Earth is getting warmer, even as occasionally you'll have a cold day. The numbers are improving, even though occasionally bad things will happen. And so I guess I don't know if that analogy is helpful or if it seems flippant. I hope it doesn't. That's not my point. My point is try to talk about the difference. My gosh, it's really cold out there. That doesn't mean that the earth is getting colder. It means that there happened to be a cold day, even as the earth is getting warmer. We have had a bad 10-day period. There's no question. We're not happy about it, and we're working to improve it. But that doesn't mean that Toledo is less safe. It doesn't erase the fact that homicides are going down and have gone down for 4 years. But it's a point worth making.
No further questions will be done at this time.
All righty.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Everything else going well? For the good of the order?
Yeah.
Okay.
Brian.
So,